Hi, welcome. What you're listening to right now is a piece of magnetic tape. That's the medium I'm working with. My name's Alia. This is my creative research. I'm interested in the voices. When I'm looking at voice, I'm not only thinking about language. Part of my idea and my process is taking language and unraveling it into sound, also in a way to examine my attachment to language itself, and using sound to take space from ideologies. I'll show you how that works in a second, but the idea I had was the voices of the past do not die. They are the ghosts that move through us as sounds in this life. So I'm looking at sound as a kind of ghost, and I'm working with cassette tapes. All of the cassettes that I have are archived. Most of them I haven't made. I found a big old bag in the reuse depot a year ago before I had a cassette player. And these are tapes that people have made. Welcome. These are tapes that people have made and their own personal kind of voices. So I thought that that was something that I wanted to start with. I haven't worked with cassettes before, but I wanted to push myself to work with physical sound. Okay, questions I have. I have many questions. How does sound move us? How does voice move through us? I've done work with physics in the past. This is something that I was interested in for this experimentation. In what ways is sound physically present in our lives? How can we listen deeper? What becomes undone? And how can I interrogate my relationship to sounds and unpack what they hold? So I'm thinking of sound also as not separated from source. When you're working with magnetic tape, essentially you're holding the sound physically in your hands. And the way that cassettes work is they are unraveling so that I can listen to them deeper. So for me, in terms of the themes that I was interested in, I found a really interesting parallel for how I'm working with sound in a physical way. Yes. So in terms of process, I started out with no cassette players. I learned how to fix cassette players through this process. I'll turn the light on later and we can look at some of the notes, but essentially I've been taking things apart to understand how they work. All of this is, again, found material, so it really pushed me, I guess, in terms of working with the materials I use and using care when I'm approaching them. So here's kind of how you would make a loop. What you were listening to is this loop. You take a piece of magnetic tape, you cut it, you open up a cassette, you tape it together, and you put it inside. And this is I twisted it in the middle, so it's a kind of Mobius strip. And essentially, like, that is how I'm looping with physical material. And the voices of other people, which is something I'm very mindful of, and that is part of the theory that I'm working with. So again, sound as physical. Okay. I like that it can be self-reflexive, and I lose a bit of control when I'm working with magnetic tape. For example, what you were listening to when you walked in was a part of an audiobook. I have this like mess of magnetic tape, which again, it's so dark, so we'll do that later. But I just take a piece of tape that's like 20 centimeters long, and I don't know what it's gonna say, and then I make the loop, and then I work with that voice after, without telling it what to say. So for example, this is another loop.
There came a time when during the fever fits, she began to talk in a hoarse, broken voice. There came a time when during the fever fits, she began to talk in a hoarse, broken voice.
Okay, so like,
there came a time when
that idea of a hoarse, broken voice, I like that it's self-reflexive. So the actual material of the tape, you can hear it as the voice in itself, and it is broken as it's playing. So I think that there's something really interesting about magnetic tape in that it is self-aware, and it also is something that gets destroyed and you have to be very gentle with when you're working with it. So I think that's also part of what I'm thinking about when I'm working with voice, is how can I communicate the level of also care that you should be using when you're approaching archive, and the fragility of voice. Like life, this tape is temporary. The more you use it, like film, the more it degrades. So you can hear its degradation, and that's something that I was interested in as well. In terms of the museum space, I'm not a visual artist. I consider myself a storyteller. I don't like to think of the way my work is reaching people as through a gallery space, as through a museum space. So I took this book, I don't know if this is bright enough, Activism. It's one of the contemporary archives, but essentially like Some of the stuff that came up in it relate to my theory and how I approach work. So storytelling is important to me in terms of voice, in terms of the ghosts of the past, in terms of now being an archive as well that we're treating with care as artists, as we're making. So these are some quotes from the book that resonated with me about how the historical dynamism of the museum carries within it all the battles fought over the public domain since its modern inception. So this was on the topic of kind of activism and also resisting as an artist in spaces that are boxes drawn in which you are allowed to resist. And the other idea, and this was again connecting to artists making work during the AIDS crisis, the implicit promise of breaking out of the museum and marketplace to take on new issues and find new audiences has gone largely unfulfilled. So part of the effort and kind of intention that I have when working with sound is I don't want people to just be experiencing this in art spaces. I think of music as something that can reach people beyond just like a physical room, and that's something that's very important to me. And in terms of senses, I don't think that visual is at the top of a hierarchy of senses. I think sound is something that is neglected, and this is something that I'm pushing for in every room I'm in art school, to try and bring sound in and also make that a priority, because I'm also interested in other ways of listening. So with sound in a space, you're also listening not only with your ears, but you're physically being moved by it in your body, the way that sound moves through the air, and then essentially it enters you through your ears, vibrating. Ears. So essentially, I think I went through this already. I'm working with distortion. So if I'm looking at language and phrases in terms of linguistics, I'm also interested in distorting it sonically. And I don't know how I'm doing on time. So
you have 8 minutes left.
Amazing. Okay, cool. So I guess.
First, how much do you want us to give you feedback? Because that's a big part of it too.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe like 5 minutes, but I'll just finish what I need to say, and
Okay.
I think like I'll pause.
Great.
Yeah. So these are some pictures of me fixing cassette players. Again, you can see in the top right magnetic tape and the insides of some of the cassette players. I'm working on modifying the actual players so that I can change the speed through which they work with a motor, which will then warp the sound in different ways. Some of my methods, deep listening. Again, I'm interested in prioritize listening as much as I prioritize speaking. So I've been going on like vow of silence days. I have been not speaking as often, especially when I'm working. I try to challenge myself to like move into a listening mode through meditation as well. I'm gonna move a little faster. Some things that I've been able to do. You come close if you'd like. But essentially, like, there are some experiments such as taking a solenoid and hitting a contact microphone. So again, like other forms of working with sound. So that, and then I've also been tuning into radio frequencies and then modulating that. So again, like listening to voice that I can't control and challenging myself to be present with it in the moment. And then lastly, I think I'll just return back to this loop that I played when you enter the room.
To infect the kings and kept house, feeling very anxious.
So in 8 seconds, I looped it through a 4-track cassette player, just that sound, and I could turn it but essentially this is the same loop. So just taking 3 seconds of this magnetic tape, putting it inside of a loop, taping it in a circle, and then pulling sounds out of that. Forcing myself to like listen deeper, if that makes sense. I've also experimented in Touch Designer, so I've done some like audio visual stuff, which is also new for me. Oh yeah, I don't know, that kind of stuff. Pushing myself to kind of figure out how I can reach people without giving up my intention around sound and around listening and treating voice with care. That's all I got. Questions, comments, concerns. If you want to touch stuff, you can touch stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it's okay. We all
Thank
feel
you.
that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, like he's a lot of fun stuff. I missed the first little bit, but the stuff that I've seen, that it's very interesting.
I have a question. Like,
Yeah.
I understand that you're so much focusing on the analog and the materiality of the cassettes, but why not albums, records? Why not CDs? What is the difference between each other? Why it drags you into a specifically I mean, you mentioned a little bit of like the flexibility that you play around. It's just that it has an historical and it brings also like the period of time that it was developed and all these other things, and you didn't touch about that.
Yeah, in
And to
terms
me,
of
there's a
time,
little bit of contradiction, a little bit of like I listen, but at the same time I don't listen to that stories and to those. And that to me is a selection, and I'm wondering that because that to me it was so interesting, that contrast between like I do care, but at the same time I don't mention it. So that to me is really interesting, and I would like to know then.
It's definitely an ask that I have for myself that I'm still navigating. This is a Little Women audiobook, so I've read the book, but this is like the book. Essentially, I chose this material because it's fragile and because it's temporary, and because you can hear when I interact with it, you can hear the destructive aspect of me altering it. You can hear when I twist it that it's warped, and so that's part of what I'm interested in bringing light to. But there is that navigation, there is that contradiction of like how I'm approaching voice as well.
Because the records you can do it, so you can alter and
Yeah, I worked with vinyl, and I also find this more fun, and I find this more dangerous than working with vinyl.
That's interesting.
And I like taking risks, so that was my thing. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it feels like you're really developing the like sort of practice right now. Do you know how you want this to be displayed? Like what sort of setting this is gonna be? I saw the visuals, those look really interesting. Are they in accompaniment? Are they synced up or?
So yeah, that was an example of something that I made in Touch Designer. I took a cassette tape, I created a mix using that, and then I made a patch in Touch Designer for that. In terms of display, this is a discomfort for me that I'm stepping into. I don't want to think about display yet because I'm not so interested in visual and gallery spaces, but I definitely think there's a way for me to work with magnetic tape where you can physically see them looping and create a structure there, or I could do something with Touch Designer. And I think that that's what I'm leaning towards, but something complementary to the sound that disappears at some point at least too if I'm doing projection. But I'm still figuring it out, and I'm still working through my like reluctance to be like in a gallery. So that's something that
It
I
doesn't
always
have to
struggle
be
with.
like in a gallery though. Like
Or
what
like
would you
in a-
be your comfortable, like where would you want it to be if outside of that, if you had like another,
Beyond me,
just
maybe.
online or?
On a cassette tape maybe, or just for someone else to mess with. But I haven't thought about that just yet. I'm just interested as well as how is what I'm doing reaching people. So I'll be experimenting still. I haven't shared most of this yet, so.
And the visuals also you can record in VHA, so be that it will be the same analog system, and you can also alter it and follow the same as the sound that you're doing into the visuals. And
I actually have so, for example, when I've done field recordings and also put them on tape, and then when you're forwarding, it makes a sound. We're good. I'm getting close to this in the discussion because I don't know if I have as much time. I recorded my walk while the show was happening. Without the sound of people walking in between, there was a cognitive dissonance. I walked past hundreds of people looking at the planes and being like, that's the bomber! And I was like walking past, and I walked for 3 hours, and I recorded it. And then when I worked with it on the tape, even though I didn't keep in the recording of the drones and the planes, but the in-between, it got to a point where through the distortion, it sounded like the drones. So the idea is like, what are we pulling apart? It is only distorted. So my relationship to sound and our relationship to sound is not separate from source. I think like sound can be done and can be used for various reasons. And so that's also something I'm examining. So this I've created myself. I have also been recording on the tape, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm producing.